Tell me about that.
Well, I don't know a lot other than he was a pilot
This is
around
your
that time.
grandfather?
My wife's grandfather, so
Well, I see. Was he in the
um,
war?
I believe so. Yes. I don't know if he. I don't think he. So she had an uncle that actually passed away. He was a B-24 pilot, and he died during the war. Or great uncle, or whatever it was.
Are the B-24s? I'm a little weaker on planes. Are they the flying fortresses or
No,
the?
that's the B-17 is the flying fortress. The B-24 was a less well armed, a less rugged, but a heavier bomb load 4-engine bomber. They actually made more
Which one of those?
B-24s than
Was it the Marauder or I can't.
no,
What
it
about
was the Liberator.
Stinger?
They actually made more B-24s than they did B-17s, but they primarily served in the Pacific because they had longer range, so they were more useful there.
Wait, I see a Jean. There he is. So where's your whiskey?
I'm taking a break from. I have to take a break from.
Well, you mentioned that.
Yeah, I was having some issues medically, and the doctor was like, how often do you drink? How long you been drinking?" And found out it was from that. And I'm from Brooklyn, so we started drinking around like 12 or 13. So yeah, he says, you have to. Apparently, the liver reheals itself or something like this. So he was mentioning you have to give it some time to kind of.
Well, that's no fun. Well, I'll drink for you.
I appreciate that. What kind of scotch you got?
Well, I was telling Matthew that I'm a poser, so I'm gonna hold up a pretty good scotch. But now it's like the only scotch I know. My father did know scotch, and he liked that, so I drink it in memory of him. And I was telling Matthew I drink out of a family cup that's like 300 years old that we found on eBay because we had a
Oh shit!
Smith.
I
You
hope
know
you watched it a couple of times.
what's that?
I hope you watched it a couple of times.
Oh, no, you want to build up the family veneer.
I have actually I just got from my wife's grandmother. She's a English professor,
Oh,
and they just sold their house, and she's giving away a bunch of the stuff that they had. And she gave me a 1919 Webster dictionary.
that's
So
cool.
hopefully, it doesn't have the Spanish flu in it.
I was given a beautiful I was given a dictionary in high school for something, and it was very nice. And now, of course, it's really like, who the hell uses a dictionary? But there's some wonderful old artifacts. Or an
Well,
encyclopedia. I had a Columbia compact encyclopedia. It was really cool, but like I haven't looked at it in decades now.
it also has the Imperial German flag in it. Where else are you going to see that nowadays?
Really,
So it
really
was before the Weimar flag, was
that's
sort of
cool.
socialized.
Well, I have an old globe that we found at a garage sale, and it took me a while to date it. But for instance, it doesn't have the Panama Canal,
Oh
and
wow.
and then so I was able to date it to something like turn of the century or 1890 or something like that. That's pretty cool, to see this picture of the world that doesn't exist anymore. Of course, you're like the battle fleets guy. I've listened to some of your recordings there, so you know that you sailed those oceans.
Well, sure, figuratively, I guess. I don't have an old globe like that. I do have it is like I've got like a 30-year-old globe, so it still has all the Eastern Bloc countries, the USSR, Poland, half of Germany, but
I had
nothing quite as old as pre-Panama Canal.
I had the privilege of going through the Soviet bloc when it still existed, seeing Poland, uh, let's see, Ukraine when it was part of it, and then some of the Central Asia. That was one of the highlights of my life. So that was very interesting. Of course, it's all gone now.
Yeah. My dad was actually in the military police and stationed in Germany during the Cold War, and he was his a detachment of his soldiers were running Checkpoint Charlie when he was there.
Oh shit!
No kidding. That's
So
really
he
cool.
said it was really surreal. He went to because as he sort of toured his command, he went through the different facilities or whatever. He was I think a major at the time, and he went to Checkpoint Charlie, and he just said it was surreal to be like staring through binoculars at East German soldiers who were staring through binoculars at a checkpoint like literally just opposite of you, and everyone's just sort of fully armed and just inches
Yeah.
away, not inches but right there basically.
Well, I went through it, so maybe I saw your dad. Who knows?
Be like the front lines over there.
I'm not sure I went through Checkpoint Charlie. I may have gone through a subway connection. I can't remember anymore.
uh yeah, I don't know if you went through Berlin. I think you went through Checkpoint Charlie somewhere, but
Probably more glamorous past than I actually happened. But that's better anyway, right?
I actually went through Berlin when I was like 9 or something like that. My parents took me to Poland, and the way it worked was we got to Berlin and we took a car straight all the way to Poland. I remember the weirdest thing because I remember my father got stopped in Poland somewhere, and they pulled him out of the car. And I remember I was like 10 or 11. I remember looking at them, and I was just like, asked my mom something like, why do the police here have big guns or something like this? And I didn't realize it until I was a little bit older. I think I was probably in my single digits, not 11 or something like that. But I realized older, like what was going on, what all that was about. So it's very surreal when you look back on it.
Well, we're so, coddled in the U.S. I had the same feeling. I remember the soldiers came on board. They were checking us. This was in Kiev or somewhere near there. No, it's a border of Poland because it's very sensitive border at that time because of what was the movement in Poland? I'm blanking right now. Solidarity. So Russia was very concerned about them. They suppressed it, but they're concerned about people coming through. So the border was kind of nervous. And they came on and they had submachine guns and military uniforms, and they never smiled. They had no social graces. So you became very respectful.
Imagine shit. Wow. Yeah, I would. I mean, I'm thankful those days are gone, but it's really interesting to see how like things have changed. I mean, when I was in Poland back then, it was like there was no food. I remember we were going like in the grocery store. They didn't have supermarkets then, and I remember going in, and we were supposed to get food for our cousin, and the supermarket, whatever market they had, was the size of like regular standard bedroom, like maybe not even a master bedroom, like a small bedroom like that you give to a child. And you walk in, and then it was like meats on one side, and I remember it was like 2 pieces of meats, and I remember looking at it, and my father was like, we'll get this one. And I looked, and I was like, is this all we're going to have? And they're like, well, there'll probably be other things, but yeah, pretty much meat's very scarce here. And I'm looking at it, I'm thinking it wasn't even enough meat for me. It was like usually it was only like maybe like this small. It was really small. And we got there and went to the farm, and my father gave the meat and a few other things to them, and they were like crying. I'm like, what the heck's going on? And it wasn't until like a year or two later, my father was telling me that they took all the meat that was in Poland, all the cattle and everything, sent it to Russia. So I didn't realize at the time. But.
I must have been there somewhere in the same range of time because I can't resist one story. So we went into this very fancy Polish restaurant. It was in a sense, very old. And it had like old hunting scenes on the wall and so forth. And it had this amazingly elaborate menu, like 15 pages. So we're like overwhelmed. We're young. And we don't know what to order. And so we start, we finally pick something. And we say, well, I'd like this, whatever it is, beef, blah, blah, blah. And they say, I'm sorry, sir, we're out of that. And we say, well, what about this? And they say, I'm sorry, sir, we're out of that. It starts to become like the Monty Python cheese shop routine. And so finally we say, well, what do you have? And they said, well, and it's very strange. They started naming the most exotic things in our eyes. They said, well, we have boar, and we have venison, and we have pheasant. And basically, they had none of the farm stock animals because those had all been sent to Russia. All they had were essentially things you could find in the forest hunting.
Huh. That's insane. It's sad that that's how it was in Poland for so many years.
Yeah.
Crazy. Thankful it's not like that here. Thankfully, I didn't have to go through that. But my father, my mother did. My father, I remember he got out of Poland, went into a refugee camp, and he was supposed to go to Australia. And last minute, the U.S. approved his visa, and he came here. And that's how he met my mom. The place that they were staying. But it's just he was saying, you were this close from being an Australian. And I was like.
Life is what happens to you while you're planning other things.
So I got the list of questions here. I don't know if you got a chance to go through them.
I don't do that till too late, so you have your chance to get me, and you can still claim that you treated me right. Tell me on my back historical heel.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was a little late. I had it done yesterday, but like I had a crazy day. So
you promised you'd be nice to me, so I'm expecting you to delete the things where I act confused and panicked.
So yeah, generally what I do is after the interview, I don't publish it right away. So after the interview, I audio edit it, so I make sure all the voices are good. such. And then what I'll do is I'll save it. I'll send it to you. You can listen to it a few times, and then you give me the go ahead, and then I'll publish it after that.
Well, you can do that. I trust you. I'm not too worried.
Okay, but I'll just send it to you like a day or two before. Either way.
Okay.
Yeah, I like doing that just in case. I had a couple of interviews where the developer lets a couple of things slip, and so that's always a good fail-safe measure because it would have destroyed some developer.
Very respectful of you. Do you have any way of checking the audio level to make sure it's okay?
Generally through this app is generally good. So what I'm hearing is generally should be what the native app is recording, but I have QuickTime on my iMac recording and I have my iPad recording. So I have a couple of redundancies built in. And Matt, I think is recording because I know Matt.
You know it's recording. I had one interview where they managed to get no audio, so you know it's recording.
Oh shit! Okay, yeah, that's not
I
good.
usually have a fallback that I record with as well in case something happens.
Well, since you're hearing me, it must be working. Okay.
Yeah, so usually like what I record through, I'll use, not streaming obviously, but I'll use OBS and I'll just do the record feature there. The audio is a little bit trickier to manage on OBS, but I can at least see that audio is piping through, so I know I'm getting something.
Perfect.
And it's just a matter of how much work it is for post-editing based on volume levels. But usually the issue is I'm too quiet and whatnot. So I can finagle that, and I kind of have an eyeball on what it looks like right now.
So let's talk about your audience briefly. I mean, I think it seems pretty obvious, right? People interested in historically oriented games. But is there anything else you want to tell me?
I mean, historically oriented games, additionally, just in general war games, whether they're historical or not. I think there's a lot of general strategy. There's a lot of strategy game enthusiasts as well. Again, not necessarily historical, but strategy game enthusiasts as well. What I will say also is part of this is this podcast does get CC'd and posted into my YouTube, but the vast majority of our views come through like iTunes downloads and Google Play downloads. Unlike what you probably saw with the trailer where that got a lot of attention, usually we don't see as much traffic on the actual YouTube stuff because most people listen to the podcast through their devices.
I see. Okay, that's good. And you don't go off historical games, but we could assume that people know XComs and so forth typically.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the topic for the strategy war or the what is it? The single malt strategy. Essentially, we cover strategy games, not necessarily historical games. I may be the historical gamer, but
I give you YouTube, so that helps me. All right. So, give me the mission of single malt strategy games.
Yep.
Thank you. I was just I had in my mind I was doing the historical gamer. So thank you. So I'll speak in a more broad sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we probably have a lot of grognards on the channel too, probably listening.
Right.
I mean, if you want to get like detail too, you can do that. I'm sure
I'll do a variety.
Yeah, I'm sure we got a nice mix of people.
A lot of XCOM and Paradox fans. Our best episodes tend, frankly, for single malt strategy, our best episodes tend to be when we cover Paradox games, which, if you're familiar with Paradox, is not necessarily historical limited. Right.
I understand. I know Paradox games. Played most of them.
Yeah, especially with the new Hearts of Iron that's coming out, the Man and Guns up there. I'm really
one of the things that's pretty pleasing is early on, in fact, the lead for Hearts of Iron 4 followed us. So that was pretty gratifying, especially when we were, nervous.
Is it Johan?
Dan Lin, if I've got his name right. Or he said dev lead. I have the impression he was the project lead.
I think you're right, because I don't think Johan's doing that. I think Johan's doing Imperator now.
That could be, yeah.
Yeah, that's another big game that they have coming out. That's going to be pretty huge. I think that's coming in 2019, though, right?
Yeah, that would be fun. I'm glad they're doing that.
Yeah, finally, this is going to be. I think this is going to be the Rome game to beat all Rome games. Finally,
I'm always more interested in Roman Empire than I am Republic. Everybody always covers Republic. The Empire is what I want to look at. I'm looking forward to it as well. I'm just like, if
we'll give you the Empire eventually.
give me Burden of Command, like 3rd Century Crisis or whatever.
Well, I have one guy who's been pressuring me forever that I should really do a U.S. Revolutionary War one. Wow. It'd be fun. I definitely like the Civil War one, but you'd have to move up the scale.
I think Vietnam would be the
company
natural.
are very interesting, I think, for that as much as, but at the levels like Lee's, lieutenants, or Grants, that would be pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Vietnam would be doable. I mean, you'd have to change a fair bit, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I like the idea of Civil War sort of at the core level. Like you almost, it's like you take, I don't know if you read Stephen W. Sears, he had a book that came out a year or two ago called Lincoln's Lieutenants, which just focuses on the high command of the Army of the Potomac. And it is fascinating how much it is like a high school drama club, like between all these different figures. It's just, it was nuts.
Well, I will read that eventually. And if you read, what's the trilogy, the great trilogy for the Civil War with oh God, I'm blanking on it. He does, he appeared on the
Ken Burns or Shelby
story.
Foote.
What? Foote, yes.
Shelby Foote.
God, I mean, it's just every other page is a story for a Burden of Command-like game. I mean, every page, really. I mean, the anecdotes are crazy.
Shelby Foote's trilogy of the Civil War was one of the first like deep historical dives I did when I was younger. I was going on a trip up to a friend's lake house in Minnesota, and we had like a 6-hour drive, and he's like, make sure to bring a book. And I was kind of going through like our library at home, and my mom had all 3 of these. So I was like, geez, these books are huge. I'm never going to finish these. But I figured, all right, I'll throw 2 in. And I read the first 2 volumes in basically 2 weeks on this vacation. And then I read the 3rd volume essentially within like 2 weeks when I got home.
And then you assumed to become a historical gamer.
It certainly led me down that path, if you will.
Yeah, I tried doing that. That didn't happen.
2,700 pages for, I think I was like in my junior year in high school. It's a lot of reading for a high school student to like commit to over a couple of weeks.
It is.
Yeah, when I was growing up in high school, like we never got out to go to like the country. I think maybe like once in a blue. So whenever I got out there, I was trying to like just suck in all the nature, go on like trails and stuff. So it was very unusual for us to go out of the city. And like even now, like I was at like a barbecue yesterday, and I'm like sitting down. It was not like it's not the country, but it was like the suburbs. I'm sitting back, and I'm like, man, this is amazing. They're like, what? I'm like hearing the crickets, or she was saying it's not the crickets, it's another weird thing that's making like a creaking sound. And I'm like, man, it's so peaceful. And they're like, you sound like you never been in this. And I'm like, no, it's just like, when I was growing up, it was like buses and cars and freaking people cursing, screaming on the street, and it was just nonstop. So I value nature as much as I can. So it's hard to like concentrate, reading a book and stuff like that when I just want to like hit the trails or do something.
I love hiking, so I'm with you.
If you ever are looking for the northern equivalent of Shelby Foote, read Bruce Canton.
Oh, that was my equivalent. That's what I read when my first Civil War reading was Bruce Canton.
Yeah. You wouldn't recommend Battle Cry of Freedom?
Well, that's newer and probably better from a scholarship standpoint. But from a writing style, like historically, there are several problems with Foote's narratives of the Civil War. Just from he doesn't really cite his sources. He kind of writes it like it's a novel rather than a history book, which is great for reading. If you're looking for the equivalent of that, Bruce Canton's either his 3-volume set on the war or his 3-volume set on the Army of the Potomac. They're both. I mean, he was a journalist, I believe, so he writes it very much in terms of a readability perspective rather than a academic historian perspective. Right. It's sort of the equivalent of Foote. Like Foote, regardless of your views around, like, are there better alternatives today from a scholarship standpoint? Sure, but if you're trying to get someone inspired by a topic or really interested because it's written so well, I would put Foote up there. It's kind of in my mind like Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Lots of historical problems with it, but it is a brilliantly written book.
Yeah, I'm still in the middle of Battle Cry of Freedom. I'm still running through that, but I'm a slow reader, so I'm turning the pages one at a time.
Anyway, we should probably get going. We could just take all this recording and turn it into a podcast, but wouldn't really cover the topic.
Starting to do like a pre-podcast. So I actually started recording as soon as we pretty much started talking about, I think, Vietnam or something like that.
Well, you can happened so far. It's all fine with me. I probably need to stop around 9:30-ish my time.
Roger, so that would be 12:30, right?
Well, in my
30
time.
your time.
Yeah, which would be 11:30 your time, Matt, right?
Yes.
Okay.
You're Pacific, right, Luke?
That's correct.
So the way I generally do it, it would be like to do an intro. I'm like, hello, welcome to another interview with on Single Malt Strategy, Green Tree Games. I would introduce you, and then Matt would jump in. And then I guess generally the way me and Matt kind of roll this was I would ask one question, he would ask another question, and then we would kind of like take turns. Does that work?
Works for me.
And just for context, so you'll probably be put. So the interview portion will be, we'll do the interview portion, but there will be a pre-portion of just sort of John and I introducing the episode and kind of talking about what we've been playing lately. That'll occur before the interview starts, and then the interview, will end, and there may be like a 5-minute segment of us wrapping up the show afterwards. So it may not feel like you're entering directly into a brand new episode of something, because we're going to handle part of the intro ahead of the interview.
Understood.
Yeah. All right. So I guess I'll start.
If I run from the room, it's just panic.
I know you you guys in California have a lot of those, right? Tremors. I think you just had one recently, right?
And what?
A tremor?
Well, we have them with some regularity, but nothing too big. But we did have one probably in the last month. Yeah.
Okay, I remember.
Where in California are you, Luke?
I'm Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area.
Oh, I was supposed to be in San Francisco this week, actually, for a work conference, but it got I had to cancel it due to some family constraints. But that would have been nice.
Well, if you guys come out to GDC, let me know.
All right.
Yeah. That sounds good. I wanted to go to GamesCon this year. There was so many things I wanted to plan, but life.
Yeah.
All right. So welcome everyone to another episode of